Welcome to Life in Biology. I'm Dr. Joel Graf. In our last video, we talked about genetic linkage, and today in this video, we're going to switch over to talking about traits that are X-linked. So one thing I want to be sure is that you don't confuse genetic linkage with being X-linked, and hopefully this video will make clear that those are two separate ideas. Going back to the genetic linkage video that I had posted, this was the last slide that I had shown, and here I'm just showing you some chromosomes that cross over, an example where two homologous chromosomes cross over and it was past the genes that we were tracking, and then this was an example where the crossover occurred between the two genes that we were tracking. And then I got a little tongue-tied as I got over here to the far right side of my slide, because I had written 1, 2, 3, 4. I had decided that these are the different combinations of cells you could end up with. And so what I want to do is I want to just erase that part there. Get rid of these numbers. And point out that there are 4 types of chromosomes here. And so you can get an all pink chromosome, an all green chromosome, and then these middle two are the ones where you have green on top, pink on the bottom, and pink on top, green on the bottom. Same thing up here. Let's get rid of those. I was just overthinking this a little bit. Got a little carried away in my drawings. Get rid of these numbers. Get rid of that divider line. Okay. And so then we end up with 4 chromosomes here, all pink, all green, mostly green with a little pink and mostly pink with a little green. Anyway, these are the 4 options that you could come up with when you make gametes from cells where the crossover point was down here. And these are the 4 examples of the chromosomes if you have the gametes where they crossover above the D. So I was getting a little bit confused last video, and I just wanted to make sure that I corrected that mistake. But that was genetic linkage. That means that the genes we were studying were on the same chromosome, and we had that issue of crossing over. Now we're going to go to X-linked genes, and we're not dealing with two different genes at this point. We're just going to let's talk about how sex-linked works. So first basic idea is that humans that have 2 X chromosomes are females, and humans that have an X and a Y chromosome are males. I'm being specific to say humans here because in other animals or organisms you can have slightly different sex-determining chromosome things going on, and I don't want to get into that with that video, but this holds true for humans. Okay. Also about the humans, the X chromosome has lots of genes, like over 1,000 genes, whereas the Y chromosome has very few genes, probably less than 100 if I remember right. And so if we're talking about sex-linked genes, almost always you're talking about X-linked genes, because there's just more genes to deal with on an X chromosome than on the Y chromosome. Okay, so sex-linked is kind of a broad definition. X-linked means we're dealing with these genes here on the X chromosome. Okay, in cells of a male, you have 1 active X chromosome in cells of a male. In females, even though they have 2 X chromosomes, you have 1 active X chromosome in cells of females, because the second X chromosome in their cells of females is inactive. That second X chromosome gets condensed. It forms what is known as a bar body, and you are generally thought that there's no gene expression from those. However, with advances in science, we're finding out that actually a fair number of the genes that are on the second chromosome, even if it is inactivated in that condensed bar body state, we're finding out that those X genes are expressed, or at least a fair number of them are expressed that we thought were completely turned off. But I don't. That's not the direction I want to go with this video. I just wanted to point out that there's still things unknown about X chromosomes, bar bodies, how the chromosome becomes inactive, how inactive that second X chromosome is, and all of that. So I'd like to switch over now to an example of an X-linked trait. So here I've got a cross between someone with two X's, so this would be a female, with a male, an X and a Y. And for the particular gene that we're talking about, somewhere on that X chromosome, the female is a carrier of a mutation in this example. So you've got one X chromosome in this female that has the WT, that means wild type, that means the quote unquote normal version of the gene. And then you have the second chromosome that female has, the X chromosome, has a mutation. And so I highlighted that in red just to be a different color to try to make this a little bit more clear. And then the male has the wild type X chromosome in this cross. And so we pull out our old Punnett square again, and we have the male here across the top. We've got the X wild type and the Y. And then here we've got the two X's from the female. The first one is wild type. The second one is the mutant type. And so we come up with 4 different squares in our Punnett square in this example. We've got 2 X chromosomes, and both are wild type because they got the wild type from the mother and wild type from the father. The male, in this case, would get a wild type X from the mother, and then of course gets a Y from the father. That's the only way you get a male, is if the father passes along the Y chromosome. And then here with this chromosome, or with this gene, we have the mutated version of the gene. The father gives a wild type X chromosome, and the mother 50% of the time will pass on the mutated form of that gene. And so we've got a heterozygous for the 2 X chromosomes. One is wild type and one is a mutant. And so that female would be called a carrier, just like the mother before it. And then we've got the X chromosome has the mutated version, and then you've got the Y chromosome. And remember, Y doesn't encode all the genes that X does, and so Y doesn't really have an answer to this mutation. It can't save the male from having this mutated version being expressed. And so there are some genetic diseases that are called X-linked recessive diseases, and a couple examples of those are red-green color blindness. You'll find in the literature, in populations, it's far more common for males to have red-green color blindness than for females. And if you do have a female that is the X-linked, or has red-green color blindness, her father probably was colorblind and her mother was at least a carrier, and then you could end up with 2 X chromosomes that each carry the mutant form. But for the most part, X-linked recessive traits, or genetic diseases, traits, whatever the correct word is, are going to be far more common in males than females. Then the other example that people give pretty often when they're talking about X-linked recessive is hemophilia. Of course, that almost always brings up the topic of Queen Victoria. So Queen Victoria was Queen of England in the, I think, mid-1800s or so. And so it was her grandchildren or great-grandchildren that were in charge of a bunch of the countries in the world around the time that World War I rolled along. Anyway, it looks like Queen Victoria had a mutation in one of her X chromosomes for hemophilia, and she passed that on to her son, and that son died because he got in an accident and the bleeding didn't stop. That's what hemophilia is. It's a blood clotting disease. But he ended up dying. But then if you keep following down the family tree of Queen Victoria, there was also another example of someone, the Tsar in Russia, his son had hemophilia, and that led to all sorts of strangeness happening in World War I with some guy that I'm blanking on his name now. I'm thinking Rumpelstiltskin, but that's not right. Not a very good story if I can't think of the right name. But anyway, there's this kind of crazy guy got into the Russian prince's or palace and claimed he could heal the hemophilia of that son. Anyway, bad story. I'll go ahead and cut this off right there. But please remember that if you talk about something being genetically linked, you're probably talking about two different genes that happen to be on the same chromosome. If you talk about something that being sex-linked or X-linked, it's because that particular gene resides on the sex chromosome rather than one of the 22 autosomal chromosomes that you have. All right, I'll think of that guy's name someday. Anyway, like and subscribe or not.